because there's a lot of room in that church. Seat hundreds of people, a few hundred, 400 anyhow. I said, you couldn't fill it up like this is Tuesday and coming up Sunday. He said not to advertise. So I thought, oh, well, God's just sort of exaggerating. And they kept on prophesying like this and kept on going. We had prayer meetings, like endless prayer meetings for the rest of that week. He kept on saying to us, he told me, don't prepare a message. I'll give you the words to say this Sunday. Well, to a Methodist young minister like me, very young minister, that was unheard of not to prepare. Like we had our communion service, read it out of a book. We never did anything that wasn't exactly there. And it was very daunting not to prepare. However, I obeyed him and I didn't prepare. And he said that they would be packed out, there'd be standing room only, and they wouldn't fit in the church. Well, that I thought was extravagant. But just to be sure, we printed 100 news flyers with some choruses on them. We thought, well, that's a lot more than we get on a Sunday night, so that'll be plenty. Well, the people flooded in. I was in the vestibule in the back. I had a collar and everything. I had a black stock. I had everything. I was the reverend. And I was praying away in the back. The closer it got to starting time, the more nervous I was becoming. And I was thinking I should have prepared something just in case, you know. Because I was saying, God, what am I going to say? And, you know, some of these times, if you know God, he goes total silence just when you need him to talk. I needed some assurance. And he seemed like he was on holidays. And I was left all by myself. And then I knew I should have prepared something. I thought I was ridiculous to think that I could hear God like this. I've made a fool of it all. The church was going well too. Now I've made a mess of it. All sorts of thoughts went through my head. I certainly wasn't a man of faith. But God said he was going to do it. Just then, somebody came in and said, there's 100 people standing outside looking through the glass wall. They can't get in the building. All the aisles are filled except the center one was left strangely empty. But everywhere else, an A-frame building, they were sitting on the floor, stuffed in under there. There wasn't an inch. The porch of the church was full of people standing. About 100 people looking in the window. And I thought, my God, this is dreadful. I don't know what I'm going to do. I never led a meeting like this. I tell you, the fear was horrible. Anyhow, I had to go out there, and just before I went out, somebody came in and said, Clark, the superintendent minister, I won't tell you his name, is out there, and he's tearing his hair out. And the last grimiest bit of courage I had drained out of my boots. I went out there to apologize and send them home. And I thought, well, I must read them some scripture at least. And I thought, what will I read? And I couldn't think of anything to read. So I looked down, and you know, the King James has got those asterisks to start a paragraph. I thought, well, any part of the Bible's good. So I started to read this paragraph. Just happened to be where Jesus healed somebody. And I read the story, and I found my head lifting up just like this, totally apart from myself. And I said, he is the same Jesus, and he'll heal you tonight. And my head was saying to me, you're a fool. You've never healed anybody in your life. The first person to come out had a blind eye. I thought, God, now I'm going to look a total idiot. It was the most miraculous meeting, one of the most I've ever seen in my entire life. And the prophetic word came. I'd speak in tongues and interpret them. I'd never heard that before that night either. And my superintendent minister was listening, and he certainly did not believe in speaking in tongues. In fact, after that meeting, I got sent to university. And then later on, I had to hand in my resignation. But that's another story. That night just happened one after the other. The most orderly fashion came up, got healed, went back to their seat, came up, and then I shut my eyes and I just was overtaken by this wonderful power that was scary but wonderful. And I started to speak in tongues and interpret, and I was preaching the gospel, telling people they had to get saved. And I had my eyes tight shut, but they told me later there was a young lady starting to walk out of the church. And I pointed at her with my closed eyes. And I said, if you walk out of this building tonight, this is your last opportunity, and you'll be condemned to hell. True. And she was the daughter of a very important man in that circuit. And they told me later, because my eyes were tight shut, told me later she spun around and ran to the altar. When I opened my eyes, people were 5 deep all around that altar, weeping for their sins. But anyhow, then I got another message from my superintendent. But God had said to me, if you keep your eyes on me, no man will stand against you. I didn't keep my eyes on him. I was too inexperienced. I was too scared. I didn't understand the supernatural. I didn't understand what God was doing. I saw my nice, orderly church that was growing well, all getting blown apart. That's in my imagination. I didn't know what on earth was happening. For the next week, in Anne's and my manse, which is right next to that church, this story's got a point to it, was literally filled with the glory of God. There was a glory that filled that place. I was so distressed. It was by 5 o'clock next morning. The superintendent of the Methodist Church of Queensland was ringing me up. He said, I'm still trying to get my pajamas on. What on earth's going on out there, Clark? My phone's been running hot. And he was a lovely man. Thank God for him. I don't know what I would have done. Went back to the Northern Territory, I think. But it was pretty difficult. And I didn't know this presence, the Spirit of Jesus was saying to me, everything's all right. Just keep your eyes on me. Everybody that walked into our house for the next week, while that glory stayed in our house, got born again or baptized in the Spirit. Just they'd walk in, they'd get filled with the Spirit, speak in tongues, took 2 or 3 minutes. Walk out of the garden gate, another one would walk in. Anne can tell you. Our children were tiny then. We only had 2 of them. And it went on like that. I couldn't keep my eyes on God. I got too afraid. But I'd only recently come from the bush sort of thing. Not that long born again. Very recently baptized in the Spirit. It was all too much, too quick. I didn't know how to handle the opposition. I didn't know anything much about the realms of the Spirit, although we were having a great move of God in that church. But I was just trying to keep one step in front of the people. When I said to God, God, I don't understand. I know we had a wonderful move going here and people were getting saved and things were happening and now it's all a mess. That's all I know. And he said to me, do you want me to leave? And I said, I don't know who you are. I thought you were Jesus, but I don't know who you are. And out of ignorance and a young man's inexperience and the fear that came in my life with all the big knobs, everything else that was just arrayed against me, he said, then I'll go. But Anne can tell you. He said, you'll go through 3 deep valleys, and after this I'll return.